Let's get started. I am William Zhao, a member of the Waha Warriors Patient Advisory Board. I had the pleasure of talking to many of you nice folks. It was a very nice experience. I'm here to introduce our speaker, Joshua Fein. He is a legislative associate with the Washington, D.C. government relations firm, Health and Medicine Counsel. And he's here to give an update on Washington, D.C. So please give a warm welcome to Joshua Fein. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it. Hi everyone, my name is Josh. I work with Jim, who you got the honor of hearing before moderate the panel. I live in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, went to University of Maryland studying government and politics. So I always had an interest in, policy, government, legislative process. So now I'm lucky enough where I live 20 minutes away from the Capitol. I see the Capitol on the way to work every day. It's really cool. So I thought after the last day of talking about, really important and serious medical, like drugs and all like the amazing presentation, to talk about something more fun, Congress. So the 118th Congress, second session. So what does that even mean? 118th Congress is elected every 2 years. The House of Representatives, the Senate is elected every 6 years. So the current balance of power, Republicans have a slim majority in the House. Democrats have a slim majority in the Senate. These are the two legislative bodies that we have in America. So this makes passing any sort of partisan kind of legislation difficult, unfortunately. This year specifically is an election year, so Congress is going to be off in October, as Jim mentioned. They're going to be back home, mainly doing campaigning. So any prominent legislation is not really likely to be passed until after the election, where it's possible that some more bipartisan bills could get taken up. So FY 2025 appropriations. So what are appropriations? Appropriations are specific like funds and the government directs like within the budget. So for us, we care about CDC, the NIH, the FDA, these types of medical like research agencies that I'm going to talk about a little bit after. So the FY 2024 process, unfortunately, like has not concluded yet because Congress has kind of been pushing it off. So right now we are still at the FY 2023 funding levels, unfortunately. So for 2023, it was $47 billion for the NIH, which was a couple billion increase over FY 2022. CDC was about $9 billion, increase of $760 million, and $1.5 billion for Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, known as ARPA-H. ARPA-H is actually a brand new entity. It's technically within the NIH, but it has its own like line item like funding within the budget, and this was created to take on like transformative, like high-level, like medical research projects. So, for example, Biden-Harris administration actually recently announced a project relating to rare diseases where they're going to be using machine learning AI technologies to look into how you can repurpose drugs to like rare diseases that unfortunately don't have any current treatment options available. So they take on, high-level projects, things that are, could be like seen as like transformative, on top of like NIH's like usual research. So FY 2024 and FY 2025 funding. So Congress right now has been operating under a continuing resolution for FY 2024. They actually just passed another CR that expired. It was supposed to expire yesterday. Now it expires March 8th and March 22, respectively, for the different appropriations subcommittee bills. So what is a CR? It's basically just a temporary funding measure that Congress passes while they finalize specific details of the overall funding package. So the fiscal year for Congress actually ends September 30th. So we've been under a CR now for over 5 months. This is something that happens pretty regularly, unfortunately, in Congress, where they just kind of keep punting. They don't want to actually, kind of like finish their work like on time. But yeah, so we're still, so we're still under the FY kind of 2023 levels with the CR. But we're hoping that within the next few weeks we will have like specific numbers for FY24. But yeah, congressional leaders, are working behind the scenes, finalizing the specific details. But we're all expecting that it's going to get done this month, and we're also expecting that President Biden will be releasing his budget request for fiscal year 2025 on March 11th. So hopefully all of that gets done. So for this year, the community, and by that I mean, the chronic disease community, an ad hoc group like that we work with in DC, suggested $51.3 billion for NIH for FY 2025. So how did they come up with this number? So they took the number the Senate proposed, which was about $49 billion, I think, and they basically increased it by 7.5%. 2.5% of that is just because of like inflation. You don't want to like lose, like fall behind like compared to inflation. And the other 5% is to expand and build like the medical research capacity. So this is something that the chronic disease community generally does like every single year, asking for more funding, to keep growing the base of like medical research at NIH. We're also asking for $6 million for the Chronic Disease Education and Awareness Program for FY 2025. So this is actually a program that my firm basically helped create at the CDC. And what it is that you can apply for grants, which WAHA applied through the CDEA, and the CDC like evaluates it, scores it, and then they give out the grants to like the best applications. And these it's for diseases that don't have specific like line item funding within like the CDC's budget. So like WAHA, like ITP, like other rare diseases that CDC has not been doing much work on, you can apply through the CDEA program. And it's usually relating to education, public awareness, professional awareness. So we're hoping that this grant is going to come through. FY 2024 report language. So as Jim mentioned, this was a major accomplishment, and we're hoping to see it in the finalized spending package that gets approved. But basically what report language is that each subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee has to release a basically massive report that details specifically every single program, every single agency, what their funding level will be. But within the funding lines are specific language that basically directs NIH, directs CDC, directs all these agencies on issues that Congress cares about and encourages them to study. So my firm, along with Jim's, we submitted this specific piece of language, like basically for verbatim, and this got in the Senate's FY 2024 report, basically just telling them, describing what WAHA is, encouraging NIH to keep research WAHA and NHLBI and AID, Office of Autoimmune Disease Research. And this is significant because especially with the rare diseases, it's often, overlooked. So getting something like this in an official, congressional report is very significant, and NIH, does, read all of this. These agencies do take the recommendations of Congress seriously, and we are submitting for FY 2025 similar types of language too. So now NIH, it's the leading medical research agency in the U.S. at the forefront of medical discoveries and innovation. It has a large campus just outside D.C., on the Red Line, if you know the area a little while. I was there Thursday, actually, because they hosted Rare Disease Day on February 29th, because it's the rarest day of the year. And, they host events, but also, these are, 27 institutes that cover basically every single disease, every single area of medical research you can possibly think of is divided between all of the different institutes at NIH. But for WAHA specifically, NHLBI and NIAID are going to be the ones that we're most concerned about. And NIH also has a new NIH director, Dr. Monica Bertagnoli. So her main goals are making sure that NIH's research is not just isolated to the lab, but that the whole medical community is working together in the clinic, in the community, and also effectively incorporating data into medical research, but also getting patient information as well. So I actually heard her speak on Thursday, and she made a really strong point that she wants with consent, of course, that patients can give consent to have their electronic health records shared, with NIH shared with physicians all over the country, because one of her main goals is kind of modernizing NIH using data, AI, machine learning, all of these amazing tools we have at our disposal, incorporating this into the research they're already doing. So she has a very interesting background. She actually grew up in a rural ranch in Wyoming. The closest house was 8 miles. So I think that she'll bring a very unique perspective. It's something that's not really seen that often in the medical community. So I think that she's going to do a really good job. And the times I've seen her speak, she's been very impressive. So I think NIH is definitely going to be in good hands with her. FDA. So the FDA is basically a regulatory agency. So they protect public health and ensure safety of drugs, food, medical devices, vaccines, even cosmetics. They have a rigorous process for approving new medications before they allow it on the market. Their campus is located outside D.C. in Silver Spring, also just outside the District of Columbia. So how does FDA relate to WAHA? So what we're looking for is what's called an orphan drug. And this was a designation that was created in 1983 when Congress passed the Orphan Drug Act. And basically, it's a designation that the FDA gives to certain medications for rare diseases that incentivizes drug companies to manufacture them. So diseases that affect less than 200,000 people can have medications classified as an orphan drug, and they can get tax credits and also a guarantee of market exclusivity for the first 7 years. So this was done because rare diseases were kind of being ignored, especially in the drug manufacturing industry, and the government wanted to give incentives that drug manufacturers were not ignoring rare diseases. So that's why the orphan drug designation exists for that purpose. And we're also working to secure a patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA as well. So what that is basically a sit-down meeting between members of the FDA, members of WAHA leadership, patient advocates. If we end up doing this meeting, which hopefully we will sometime in the next year or so, it's possible that many people in this room could be attending, either in person or virtually. But basically, what you do is you have a sit down with the FDA. It's something they created relatively recently in about 2012. And they wanted to make sure that patients were being more included in the drug development process. So patients would just kind of tell their story, talk about the symptoms, how it affects their life, talk about current treatment options, and then FDA kind of uses this in the process of drug development. Now the CDC, so CDC is the leading agency for public health. So they use the most relevant and accurate science and data to make public health recommendations to the American people. Their campus is located in Atlanta. So what CDC does is they're providing the public health guidance for everyone all across the country. Now, it became famous during COVID, all the different COVID guidance. They actually just released updated guidance, they're still doing it yesterday about COVID and about vaccines, about the process for testing, treatment, isolation. But CDC is the one that's educating the public about what they see based on the data, based on all of the most accurate information they have. What is the best public health guidance for the American people? And they also conduct their own research on chronic health issues, especially in local communities. So they're very much in the public health centric, trying to solve problems at the community level, not as much in research and advanced medical breakthroughs, but more about trying to connect all of the data and the science to the local communities. So 2024 legislation that is prominent in the chronic disease community. So the two main bills in the chronic disease worlds right now that have a broad bipartisan support, over 100 co-sponsors each, that we are hoping will get passed at some point, maybe after the election. So number one is the Help Copays Act. So this would prohibit copay accumulator schemes, where insurance companies that have financial assistance programs are basically not applying these to deductibles and out-of-pockets, which doesn't really make sense if you're trying to financially assist them. Why is it not applying to the money that patients are spending on their health care? So this bill has a lot of support, both sides of the aisle, so I'm hoping that gets done. Safe Step Act. So this would place limits on step therapy, or you might know it as fail first therapy, that's employed by insurance companies. So what that basically is that a lot of times, patients goes to a doctor, they get prescribed a certain medication, they go to the insurance company says, no, you can't take this medicine yet. What you have to do is you have to take a generic, sometimes cheaper, treatment. And this, of course, has very negative consequences for the patient. It's not what the doctor wanted for them. Sometimes they've already been on that drug before and failed. And this leads to, delayed in, the patient's getting better. But sometimes it leads to, the patient's status deteriorating, having to visit the hospital because they weren't getting, the proper medication that they were literally prescribed by their doctor. So it's a very common sense thing. It doesn't really make sense why insurance companies are deciding, what drugs patients can have, instead of the doctors. So this is another bill that has, wide support across the aisle. It's something that cuts across basically every single chronic disease organization, that my firm works with, because they all face kind of the same issues, with the insurance company. So that's why, we're very optimistic, probably the most on that bill than any other one, that it is going to get passed. And part of that is because it got thrown into a PBM reform package that was passed by the Senate Help subcommittee last year. And I won't go into all the details of what that act does. But basically, it's just regulating pharmacy benefit managers, which are intermediaries between drug manufacturers and insurance companies. But since the Safe Step Act got put into a larger package, which sometimes happens in Congress, where widely supported provisions of one bill get thrown into another, so it makes it easier to gather wide-ranging support for the legislation. So because of that, it's another reason we're optimistic that possibly after the election, the Safe Step Act, couldn't make it through Congress. So now I'll talk about the Inflation Reduction Act a little. Even though this happened a couple years ago, it's still, very relevant because some of its provisions are starting to come into play now. So a couple years ago, President Biden signed the IRA into act. It was approved on partisan lines. It does a lot of things, not just healthcare-related, energy costs, deficits, inflation. But rare disease organizations, the chronic disease community was very supportive of the IRA because of its provisions, on healthcare costs, on Medicare. So, for example, IRA is capping out-of-pocket costs for insulin at $35 per month under Medicare Part D. So, this is obviously very significant for, the people who are on that medication. But in general, it had, very broad support within the chronic disease community. And another part of the IRA was designating 10 medications per year until 2029, and then the list goes to 20. And basically what HHS did is that they chose these 10 medications. This was the first list, and every year they're going to have another 10, another 10, another 10, and then 20, and they're basically going to negotiate for the first time the prices of these drugs with the drug manufacturers. So even though WAHA right now unfortunately does not have a treatment, people in the chronic disease community, were very supportive of this measure because these medications were ones that were very kind of ubiquitous, commonly used. You can see here, the vast amounts of people that are on it, 3.7 million for Eliquis, 1.5 million for Jardiance. So they announced this initial list in August 2023, and they're undergoing the negotiations this year and next year. So now just a little on advocacy 101, kind of what we do like in DC, but also the community in general. So what we're trying to do is have a coordinated nationwide effort by grassroots advocates that help advance research, increase research funding, improve like overall health, educate. So it's kind of like what we did in October. People from all across the country, all coming to DC, going to their members of Congress. And the main thing that I always, tell, people before they go into meetings are usually two things. One, educate on what the disease is. Chances are, when you're talking to, a national member of Congress or a staff member, a local, lawmaker, they may not have ever heard of WAHA. They may not know anything about the disease. You have to kind of just give them like a basic overview of, what are the challenges in, your life, like how does it affect you, and make it, local too, because especially with Senate, senators, House members of Congress, what they really care about is how it affects their constituents. So you have to talk about how it affects you and other people like in your community, and that is a way that will get their attention because they really only care about, they care the most by far about what's going on like with their constituents. So what we want to do is have individual advocates all working together, with one singular voice, everyone going to their own member saying, this is WAHA, this is why it's important to me, this is why NIH funding could be critical for finding, a treatment. This is why like the Safe Step Act would help me. This is why the Help Copays Act can help me. Everyone talking to their local representatives, and it makes a big difference because it adds up. You start with one co-sponsor, but then suddenly you see bills, it's over 100, 150, and now it gains momentum and has a real chance of passing. So because the government makes so many important healthcare decisions on treatments, coverage, out-of-pocket costs, funding for all these critical agencies, advocacy is just a really important thing that we do, and we definitely want to have like a larger, like more expanded Hill Day, this fall. We had a great event. Sorry about Nancy Pelosi's eyes being closed. Yeah, I was the photographer. It was it was a very quick moment. She was like, trying to like run somewhere else. So, my bad. But next time I'll make sure her eyes are open. So finally, we were able to get a short little video from Dr. Tina Irv. So she works at the National Institutes of Health outside of DC. I'm working for one of their rare disease research networks. So she's basically just going to talk about like what she does, what NIH does, and how it affects rare diseases in the rare disease community. Yeah, so that's everything I had. Yeah, definitely, we like to work a lot with NIH, all the different institutes. Sometimes we'll organize meetings, but it's definitely like a collaborative, process between, the patient side, the researchers, and like industry too. So yeah, we very much appreciate her taking the time, to record that. And yeah, if you want more information about any of the stuff that she was talking about there, and like the reporter, like the rare disease information, feel free to talk to me after, and I can direct you, to where it is. But yeah, that's everything I had.